Press. There we go. Testing. Okay, good. Now we're live. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for the inaugural media briefing of the Eastern and Southern Africa Commission on Drugs. It's a very auspicious occasion for us. We've had 2 days of deliberations on a range of subjects. I'd like to introduce on our panel, starting from the right, we have His Excellency Kgalema Motlanthe, the former President of the Republic of South Africa and the Chair of the Eastern and Southern Africa Commission on Drugs. He also heads the Kgalema Motlanthe Foundation and is a member of the Global Commission on Drug Policy. Next to him, to his left, is His Excellency Joaquim Chissano, the former President of the Republic of Mozambique. He's a commissioner on the Eastern Southern Africa Commission on Drugs, and he's chairperson of the Joaquim Chissano Foundation. We have Professor Abdool Karim, who is also a commissioner on the commission. She is an associate scientific director of CAPRISA, is an infectious diseases epidemiologist, and holds professorships in clinical epidemiology at the Mailman School of Public Health at Columbia Universities, and in public health at the Nelson Mandela School of Medicine at the University of KwaZulu-Natal. Unfortunately, one of the other commissioners, His Excellency Cassam Uteem, the former President of Mauritius, was unable to join us. We are also lucky to be joined from far across the ocean by Her Excellency Helen, the former Prime Minister of New Zealand and Administrator of the United Nations Development Programme, and she is Chair of the Global Commission on Drug Policy. And finally, it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Michel Sidibé, who is a commissioner at the Global Commission on Drug Policy, former UNAIDS Executive Director and Undersecretary General of the United Nations, and former Minister of Health and Social Affairs in Mali. So very quickly, as by way of introduction, parts of Eastern and Southern Africa are facing a serious and multifaceted drug problem, which has not been met with a commensurate response. In recent years, the volume of heroin shipped from Afghanistan via Pakistan along a network of maritime routes to Eastern and Southern Africa, particularly along the Swahili coastline, appears to have increased considerably. Most of that is destined for Western markets, but we see worrying signs of spillover trade and local consumption within the region, some of it estimated at 10% of the total volume of narcotics trafficked to and through the region. At the southern end of the eastern coast, here in Cape Town, where we've chosen to launch the commission, there has been a severe problem with inexpensive heroin linked to high levels of gang control and violence. We see killings occurring almost daily in gang-afflicted areas of the city. Levels of drug use in the Indian Ocean island states are also of particular concern. Mauritius and the Seychelles, for example, have some of the highest numbers of people who use drugs per capita in the world. And the UN estimates that by 2030, the number of people who use drugs in Africa will have nearly doubled. So this particular commission arose out of a virtual meeting convened by President Kgalema Motlanthe, President Chissano, President Uteem, and Professor Abdool Karim, and also Her Excellency Rhys Dreyfus, the former President of Switzerland, and a Global Commission on Drug Policy Commissioner met. And this is the beginning of a process. This week's meeting marks the official launch of this commission. It is hoped that from here, the commission will work to review current policies across the region, recommend more evidence-based policies that are oriented towards health, harm reduction, and rights. And the Eastern Southern Africa Commission also aims to mobilize public opinion and catalyze political support for further action at national, regional, international levels. Without further ado, I'd like to hand over to President Motlanthe to begin this briefing.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much to members of the Fourth Estate. We are happy to interact with and engage with you. We've just concluded our inaugural and launch meeting of the Eastern and Southern Africa Commission on Drugs, and the 2-day sessions focused on really listening to experts, academics, and members of civil society and also sharing perspectives and experience and lessons from the West Africa Commission on Drugs. So this has been a very enriching two-day session, and we felt that given the role that the media plays, we should engage with you because, you know, it's through the media that the information you know, flows and reaches the broadest cross-section of society. And we're happy that we are joined in this media session by journalists virtually from across the region. And we hope that this commission will be able to mobilize and, you know, communities across the region and secure commitments from governments in a way that would give voice and space of participation to key communities who, you know, given the criminalization and prohibition of drug use has resulted in human rights of even children and young people being violated. And we hope that through the commission, we will be able to search for alternative ways and more humane ways of dealing with these societal problems. And I'm accompanied here as the commissioners have been introduced. We also have in our midst Helen Clark, who's the chair of the Global Commission, and Michel Sidibé, who's also a member of the Global Commission, and as well as the West Africa Commission on Drugs. And so we thought, you know, we should offer you the opportunity to pose whatever questions you want to pose to us, and we will be able to respond accordingly. Thank you.
Thanks very much. I'd like to hand over now to our next commissioner, President Chissano, if you have a few words to say.
Thank you, Chair. I'm delighted that I could be present at this launching meeting of the Commission on South African Commission on Drugs. And this is my first time to get in contact with the many discussions which are taking place in the world since the time I went a bit out of the business of politics and the following of the events at the United Nations and so on. And I discovered that there's a lot which has been done in this field to deal with, to find a good way to combat the bad drugs effects in the world on our population, our children, women. Actually, when I came here, I thought, well, just that drugs are bad, we have to fight against it, and so on. But here I learned that there are ways of fighting, because not all the ways of fighting are good. Some become harmful. We have learned a lot. and discussion is continuing. We are just starting in this region, East and Southern Africa, and you can notice that not all the region is well represented here, but this is the launching. I think that through this press conference, those who were not here, they will wake up and try to find out what we have been doing in these 2 days here. And I think that there will be a lot of curiosity. And I think that the Commission will make a difference in bringing more awareness to the problems and to give way of how the problems should be solved. We had the opportunity to learn from the experiences of the West Africa, who started 10 years ago now. So they have a lot of experience, but also the global Commission, I think, will go along with us and the way. It's a long way to, we have to walk. I can notice that there are some regions are not having commissions, like the central region of Africa. Maybe the Northern Africa also, they don't have commission, but now have 2 commissions in 2 economic regions which are very important, SADC and ECOWAS. So this will make a difference. And fortunately, now with us is Helen Clark, who she, when she was Prime Minister, she took a lot of interest in this region. And she followed our development, all problems, and New Zealand helped in many ways in all fields, including health. And we think that she will be a good partner within the Global Commission to help our activity to succeed. And so I thank you, President Motlanthe, for having invited me to join you in this commission.
Thank you, Mr. President. Professor Abdool Karim.
Thank you very much. Greetings, everyone. It's really an honor and a privilege to have this opportunity to engage with you as media and hope for amplification of some of the work that we're doing. We're right at the beginning. There have been 2 exciting days of incredible insights and inputs that we've received from numerous experts. This is a multifaceted problem. As you will hear, it's not just an issue for the Eastern Southern African region, but globally what we've been seeing is increase in drug consumption in very complex ways with many ramifications at a community level. And it's not something that can be solved by one entity or one ministry. And I think we have humility to appreciate that this is the beginning of a journey, but I hope that we can, with partnerships with civil society, key stakeholders, and working across different departments, but also sharing good practices between regions, between countries, that we can accelerate and start to see the light at the end of the tunnel. I just wanted to focus a little bit on health issues because we already have a high burden of HIV. 60% of the global burden of infection is in Eastern and Southern Africa. It's primarily being transmitted sexually, but with the increase in substance use, we're seeing an increase also in injecting drug use, which provides a new mode of transmission. And while drug use itself is not a cause of increased transmission, it's poor policies on how we manage particularly drug use, and needle syringe exchange programs, substitution therapy for those who want to manage their dependency, and also what we're seeing with increased purification and pure products and pricing across the region, that we're seeing a lot more deaths from overdose. And here again, there are solutions. But the other side, which the public doesn't quite appreciate, is we have a whole lot of regulated medicines that are used for pain management for different conditions. And here access is uneven because of rules and laws and the way we manage this. And some of that is the traditional approach that has dominated of the war on drugs. And what we've learned very clearly, substantive evidence to show that's not the way to go. And what we need is a human rights approach. We need more human-centered approaches, and we need a more humane way of dealing with it that includes law reform, changes in policy in health, but in a whole range of things, and that also importantly requires full engagement of all sectors of society. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I'd like to now call on the Prime Minister. Thank you.
Well, very pleased to be here to support the launch of the Eastern and Southern African Commission on Drugs. Of course, President Motlanthe is a member of the Global Commission, and other member here is Michel Sidibé. This commission really becomes part of a network of regional commissions, all working to address the particular specificities of the issues in their regional context. There's long been a Latin American regional commission, the West African one started by the late Kofi Annan, and then one is also operating currently in the East Europe, former Soviet space area as well. I think the points I'd want to put on the table are that there is a growing appreciation around the world of the very real harms associated with the prohibitionist approach of the war on drugs. It has led to really massive human rights violations. It's associated with harsh and utterly disproportionate treatment of people convicted of so-called drug offences, ranging all the way to the death penalty, but judicial corporal punishment, over lengthy sentencing, over incarceration is very much associated with this prohibitionist drive. And if you look at the composition of our prison populations and look at how many are there on drug offending, it shows us the scale of it. The Global Commission takes the view that prohibitionist approach was always bound to fail. Throughout human history, human beings have reached for some kind of substance for whatever reason. And we have found ways in so many of our societies now to regulate drugs which really are or can be quite harmful, like tobacco and alcohol. And we need to start drawing on those experiences of legal regulation as we look at how to map a way forward for reform with the currently illicit drugs. There is a great deal of momentum around the world on drug law reform. Won't go into detail on these opening comments, but it ranges from wide-ranging decriminalisation and an emphasis on massive harm reduction. And of course, in some countries now, like Canada and Uruguay, a full legalisation for cannabis, and legal markets created. Germany is also considering the same at the current time. But we are seeing interesting movement around the world. On harm reduction, so many countries still are not offering harm reduction services which would address the needs for clean needles, for opioid substitution, for availability of overdose antidotes, capacity to have drugs tested, a lot of bad developments in lacing of drugs now in the illicit market, and then the drug consumption rooms that have got traction in several regions and a number of countries are also an important way of minimising harm. But there's other new developments in the harm reduction space as well. President Motlanthe mentioned the access to controlled medicines issue, and it is sad to say a huge area of inequity between global north and south, that around some 75% of the world's population doesn't have access to essential pain relief because really of overzealous interpretation of conventions. In the north, we're accustomed to having pain relief for terminal cancer, for whatever. But in so many parts of the world, that's not possible. And the reform agenda needs to look at spreading access to essential controlled medicines as well. So quite a lot of momentum on reform around the world. And I think that this regional commission starts with a tremendous base of information, actually. We often say we don't have data, but listening here for 2 days to expert presentations from right around Africa, I think there's a lot of information on which to base approaches now to authorities for change, which is health and human rights centred. So from the Global Commission perspective, we really wish this commission well and look forward to working with it and cooperating closely. Thank you.
Thank you, Prime Minister. If I could call on Dr. Sidibé.
Thank you very much. I want to just to start by saying that it was 2 day, amazing 2 days. I said that because the energy in the room was just impressive. It was not just energy, but the level of competency on this issue was giving me hope for the Commission. I don't want to repeat all the things which has been said, but I want just to bring you back to 10 years back with Kofi Annan and Obasanjo, when they decided to launch the West Africa Commission on drug. One of the major challenges those days was how to break the conspiracy on silence. Nobody wanted to talk about it. It was a taboo, and it was a silent crisis. That's one point. Second point is that people were really convinced that these issues was not the issue of West Africa, that West Africa was just a transit point, that drugs was coming from certainly heroin from Asia and also cocaine from Latin America, and it was just transiting. So they were considering that it was not really their problem. So the objective of this commission at the beginning was to mobilize public awareness, political commitment, to make sure that also we can develop evidence base. Like Helen said, we have a lot of information today, but evidence-based policy recommendation, and make sure that people can understand that it is not just a transit point, it's becoming a point where, a region where young people are exposed, where young people are faced with this problem, and the problem becoming a more and more serious problem for all of us. But where we found this report very important, we produced 2 reports. The first report was a flagship report to show to the politician that not just in transit, to demonstrate that it is a region where the drug problem become more and more issues. But the second document we have been able to develop is just a guideline, which we call a model law, was to help different countries to really reflect on all the things my colleagues and friends were mentioning, and not just considering that it is by criminalizing, by bringing a prohibition that we will be able to stop, but helping people to move out of the shadow and become part of a transformative agenda. And that could have not happened without capacitating civil society, without making sure that we engage with civil society groups. That's what we did to give a voice to the issue. It's not always easy, but I want just to say that today I'm happy to say that this is changing completely the perspective of a decision maker, and progressively we are seeing change happening. And I am happy that we have been participating to this launch in eastern and southern part of Africa. Thank you very much.
Great, thanks very much. It's my appreciation to the panel. If there are no further comments from there, I'd like to throw it open in our remaining moments to questions from the media. We do have people in the room, and we have quite a number of people online. So if you could raise your hands online, or if there's someone in the room. Perhaps I could start off with, we have an emailed question which came through a bit earlier from Guy Oliver, who was saying the criminalization of recreational drugs is among one of the longest and most intensive disinformation campaigns witnessed in the past century. How can reversing an ingrained belief among both serving politicians and the greater public that sees state violence as the only solution to addiction have any chance of correction? More so when it challenges the formidable forces of monotheism and goes head to head with the global security industry that where profits are based on continuing prohibition. I'm not sure if anyone on the panel would like to pick up on that. Quite strong statements.
Well, I mean, I absolutely agree with the premise of the question. I think the good news is that there are governments who have been prepared to take this on. And the most recent, actually, is the German Chancellor, who's absolutely determined that he wants a legal market created for cannabis, and he wants decriminalisation across use and possession of drugs. But for each country who moves, and there have already been quite a lot, others can take encouragement. It encourages the law reform effort. So if this commission, joining with all the other actors in civil society, academia, research community, can help push this along so we begin to get forward-leaning reform in Africa, that will encourage others as well. But the question's right. You're trying to overturn decades of this so-called war on drug approach, and turning around an entrenched position like that isn't easy. But just to repeat what Michel said, when the Global Commission started in 2011, it was because it was felt there was a conspiracy of silence around these issues, that no one dared to stand up and say, this isn't working, this is wrong. And the Commission did that from the very beginning, and began to build the evidence base for what could be changed. And suffice to say, we have a lot of that, and we continue to advocate and support reform processes around the world. Oh, I can even, as Michel said, say that we have plenty of reports and go online for those. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Would any of the other commissioners like to comment on that? Okay. Thank you. We have a question from Michael Guarisa from Health Times Zimbabwe. I'm not sure, Claudia, could you unmute? Michael, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you. Hello?
We can hear you.
Okay, thank you. My question just goes to, I think, to anyone at the floor. I just want to find out, maybe I didn't get that quite clearly, what is the role of this commission? And maybe just to find out, does it have arresting powers like other commissions that we have in our countries on corruption and whatnot? And my second question is on harm reduction. Do you think the region is ready for harm reduction, considering that back here in Zimbabwe, recently we had one of our ministers announcing that anyone caught using any of those recreational drugs and any other drugs would be arrested. So I just want to find out if you think the vision is ready for harm reduction, and what plans you have to actually, drive the region towards that vision of harm reduction. Thank you.
All right, the line wasn't terribly clear, but I think the first question was what the role of the Commission, whether it has arresting powers, and then secondly, what the Commission's work on harm reduction would be.
Just to clarify, neither the Global Commission nor the Regional Commission are in the business of arresting. They're in the business of advocacy for better law and practice based on evidence and health and human rights considerations. And I think with respect to harm reduction, of a sort of talk about it globally because others have the regional expertise. But you know, in our societies, there's so many of our families who are familiar with what has happened to a family member who went into, purchase drugs illicitly, had a bad experience. We know of many, many deaths and injury done. You know, if I think of personal experiences to me, a friend whose son had a dependence, and without there being an antidote drug in the house, this young man who lay in a coma at home for 2 days lost a leg and lost the use of an arm. You know, but we will all have stories that we know. So, you know, harm reduction and decriminalisation of use and possession are very much aimed at ensuring health and well-being. No one should die because of a bad drug policy environment, but many do, and that I think is what we're in the business of trying to change. But I would like, the region to speak on that from the regional context.
Maybe I should add that I think there are a number of organizations that are providing harm reduction strategies and there's a growing evidence of how effective it is. I think we all have to start some way. While these programs are in place, they're happening in parallel with criminalization of small amounts of drugs for personal use. So that decriminalization and law reform needs to happen for it to be more effective. But as was mentioned earlier, there's the evidence of what works and our ability to provide that. And I think within each country, there may be some very specific issues that we need to be looking at in terms of scale up of the programs, and it can't be done in isolation of the law reforms that need to complement efforts of harm reduction.
Thanks very much, Professor. We still have some time for some questions. I have another question which came through from Guy Oliver, but I believe he's online. Guy, about Madagascar, if you wanted to ask that. This doesn't seem to be working. Let me ask the question for him then. Madagascar appears to be at a crossroads between grasping the opportunity of developing a sustainable and regulated cannabis industry or becoming a hub for the illegal global drug industry, both for users and as a transit country for distribution. If Madagascar chooses to follow the neighboring Mauritian lead of cracking down on recreational drugs, would this increase the risk of the island state becoming a narco state that is already riven with hardwood and gemstone criminal syndicates, and what would the consequences be for one of the world's poorest populations? It's a very specific question. We also have some of our experts here that we could potentially ask that question to, if no one on the panel. Right. Any of you? I was looking for Jason Eli, but yeah. All right, let me park that question for now. Thanks. I'll come back to it. We have another question from Marcos Miguel. unmute Marcos.
Hello, good evening.
Hi, we can hear you.
Yeah, I don't know if you can hear me. Hello?
We can hear you.
Can I proceed? Yeah. My experience show that the border management control, the government agency representing the borders, they have been played a key role in the drug trafficking control. Recently, the World Customs Organizations, together with the World Trade Organization, they started some policies regarding to control of containers, and the method that it aims to increase the safety at the borders. If you're aware, there are some measures regarding with the non-intrusive inspection. We use scanners to see what is going, what's the containers are carrying. It is also helping to identify the illicit weapon that has been exported, the drugs and other things. What I'm trying to say is border management control, coordinated border management between the government, the border agency of two neighboring countries sharing the same border, it can help to control trafficking. So there's some measure that must be taken into consideration. Because experience, for example, in Mozambique, between Mozambique and South Africa, we have stopped a lot of traffic of drugs there, using dogs, using with the scanners and the other tools. So it is some measure that should be taken in consideration. Thank you.
Thanks very much. The floor here, if there are any takers from the panel. Otherwise, I think Sean. So we have Sean Shelley, who's bringing a microphone over there, one of the experts here.
Thank you. The problem is that to exercise stringent border control on containers and that, you'd basically have to shut down all trade. It's already tremendously problematic to search that number of containers. We've got huge backlogs. And also, the transnational organized criminal enterprises have many ways besides containers. We know that down the east coast of Africa, there have been bales of drugs just dumped in the currents, which come down and they've got tracking devices on them and they get picked up off the coast. So the answer is certainly not to restrict trade and to tighten up trade opportunities between countries in an area where we already need further economic development. We've really got to address this problem on other levels. I'm not saying just let your borders be porous, but certainly you're not going to get the level of capture of these products being transmitted across or transported across borders by tightening up your border controls. You'd have to just stop all trade through the borders and there'll just be another place opening up as well. So no, the problem is not just porous borders, it's actually the market, and as soon as you've got a demand, you will get a supply.
Thanks. Just with reference to the earlier question about Madagascar, Benisa Pondi from Vocal in Kenya said that she would be able to handle that.
I think the place where Madagascar is where many African countries were 20 years ago. When you have scarcity of resources, you want to focus on what bothers you the most. We all know that in the past, the HIV prevalence upon which harm reduction is anchored was very low in Madagascar. And so the government probably did not put any importance on now, let us start harm reduction or something like that. And that is why they've continued cracking down on people who use drugs. But whereas Africa is now recording a decrease in HIV prevalence, now Madagascar is going up. So it's like they're alone and it's an island. So the government will have to focus on interventions that focus on people who use drugs, decriminalization, and actually start putting money on healthcare promotion for people who use drugs. I think it's just a matter of having scarcity resources. It's poor. And then the fact that HIV prevalence was low, there was really no focus on drug use as an issue then, but it is now. Yes, thank you.
Thanks very much. I have another question here from Sipokazi Fokazi from the Sunday Times. Sipukazi, can you hear us if you'd like to ask your question? Sipukazi?
Yes, I can hear.
Ah, thank you. Now we can hear you.
I wanted to ask whether South Africa is looking at scaling up any of the harm reduction programs, because I understand at the moment that it's only these programs are provided by NGOs and the government is not really involved. So I wanted to find out whether the government is looking at being involved more in these harm reduction programs. Thank you.
All right, I think for that one I will call again on Sean Shelley. He's been working closely on these issues.
Much to many people's surprise, half the harm reduction services in South Africa are actually funded by the city of Tshwane. And they match the numbers which the Global Fund funds in the rest of the country. So we have got municipal level governments funding harm reduction services in the country. At a national level, to supply methadone and similar products through the health system is a long process. It's underway. I can't see a short-term solution, meaning in the next few months, but we have seen the first tenders for methadone coming out in South Africa, and we are hopeful that the government is moving in that direction, but it is not an easy route to go, and the continued cooperation between government and the civil society sectors is an essential way of expanding it, and looking towards municipal funding is a route to become less dependent on international donor funding. Thank you.
Do we have any additional questions coming through? I think not at this stage. Any from the floor here? Yes, Karen.
It's a simple question. I just wanted to find out, I know you're focusing on legislation, harm reduction. Have you been in talks and will you be in talks with law enforcement? And like you mentioned, Professor, in terms of police officers arresting people with small amounts of, let's say, cannabis, etc., how do you go about changing that? Will there be, for lack of a better way to put this, education in place for law enforcement? Thank you.
Mr. President?
Well, thank you very much, Karen. The approach really of the Commission is to, in the main, focus on harm reduction, decriminalization, and of course the criminal justice system, rather than penalizing end users, should really focus on the manufacturers and the traffickers, the major players, because the focus on the end users clog the prison population, create all manner of violation of basic human rights. Well, thank you.
Sorry, a comment from Bernice Apondi in front here.
I think the work with law enforcement officers is part of what harm reduction package is. We have been giving a lot of information to law enforcement officers. There's a concept we call law enforcement and public health, where we find police to be both enablers on both sides. They can arrest at the same time they can refer. And the police being a source of authority, when the community see them being friendly and referring people who use drugs, the people that they used to arrest, they are now referring for services. There has been a change, there has been a shift in how people view and perceive services for people who use drugs. So policemen become part of the collaborators in this aspect. They have been trained, they're allowed to attend conferences, they're allowed to attend training. And in Kenya right now, under the Director of Public Prosecution, they're actually reviewing how they're able to not to arrest everybody and just do diversion, even at the police station. During COVID, we had a lot of problems because a lot of drug users were being arrested. But that collaboration made sure that a lot of people who use drugs were not taken to jail. Even if they were arrested, civil society and community members were visiting police stations. Right? How many people are in this police station? How many people are in this? Do they have masks? And then on that pretext alone, they were being let go. So we have formed a collaborating working environment with the police. And as we continue to do it, more and more policemen are coming on board. Yeah.
Thanks, Bernice. We have one more question online, and then I'll take another one from the floor if there is. Fred Olowok, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it correctly. Fred, can you hear us?
Yes. Hello, how are you?
Good, thank you, and you?
Can you hear me? This is Fred Olowok of the East African.
Yes, we can.
Speaking from Nairobi. I would have wished to see, before the launch of this commission, the figures in the increase and the number of tonnage or volumes that are moving through maritime routes. Do anybody have figures here which you can use for justification?
I don't think we actually have. Bernice has some comments on that.
What we know, Fred is from Kenya, so thank you for that question. According to our research and according to what passes through in terms of trafficking, there is actually an increase. What we are seeing is traffickers being more creative. People don't use the usual ways that you are going to get a container and put cocaine and then it goes. What we found when we were doing our research was stuffed in imported goods, trying to evade the police. Even though the figures can be found in reports and research that has been done before, there's actually been an increase. And what we've seen in East Africa actually is like the society. People are getting used to being employed to do that work. It is becoming like a source of income. And even somebody asked about containers. In East Africa, we're not talking about containers anymore. We're talking about boda boda. I don't know whether you know boda boda. The motorbike transport. It's that easy. We are talking about sex workers being used. We're talking about school children being used to transport across the border. So when you focus on the container, you lose it because the person is already passing through the border. And there are very many porous routes within our East Africa countries. So there's no longer any focus on containers because traffickers are trying to beat the system.
Thanks, Bernice. Sean, did you want to say something?
We've got to acknowledge that the ways of collecting data on volumes are imperfect. They rely heavily on police seizures. We know that those figures are not necessarily accurate for a lot of reasons. Recently, we've been working with the Global Initiative Against Transnational Crime and doing some really creative ways of estimating drug market sizes in some African countries. That data will be released in coming months. And one of the things that is emerging is the need to include people who use drugs in research to see the size of the market from the consumer side as well as from the supply disruption side. Thanks.
Thanks very much. I think at this juncture, we've got quite a packed schedule, so I have to call an end to the conference. Are there any final questions from the floor? Going. Okay, I knew you would do that, Karen.
Very briefly, what next? What happens next? I assume you meet again, but if I were to go out to someone in the street now and say there's this amazing commission, they are going to do X, Y, and Z, what happens next? Thank you.
Mr. President?
Well, currently, as we indicated earlier on, that this was the launch of the commission. As soon as we are done with this press conference, as commissioners, we're going to wrap our heads around all the issues and suggestions that emerged from these two-day sessions, and to determine what the next step is going to be. Remember, this is a regional commission, and therefore we got to take the particularities of each and every country into account in how we determine the next step here. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Really appreciate you all coming today, especially those joining us from far afield online. It's been a privilege hosting you, and hopefully we'll have updates for you. Is there something else that's come through there? No, that's an earlier question. Great. Thanks very much. We'll call it closure then.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay. I used to be on the other side.